Welcome to the Old Guy AI podcast, brought to you by MongoDB. And now, here's Scott Sanchez and Pete Johnson.
Hello there. I'm Pete Johnson. I'm here with my friend, as always, Scott Sanchez. And Scott, today's icebreaker, controversy. You've lived in both places, Shake Shack or In-N-Out.
Ooh, In-N-Out is delicious. Love In-N-Out. I don't crave In-N-Out. I don't crave Shake Shack either, but there is something about the original OG Shake Shack in Madison Square Park and being able to just go and grab a burger and sit on a bench and watch the dogs walk by. So I think just from like the deeply ingrained New York City memories for me, I think it's the OG Shake Shack in Madison Square Park. How about you?
Okay, well, if legend has it that my parents stopped at an In-N-Out burger bringing me home from the hospital. Here's the thing that people miss with In-N-Out burger, and I know you know this. If you're ordering off the menu, you're doing it wrong. You got to go with a
Yes.
local who understands the secret menu. And if you learn anything from this conversation, get your fries well done.
Yes, because then they usually cook you up fresh fries. The other trick could be just ask for them without salt, because then they have to cook them fresh. You don't get the ones that are like sitting there. Scoop, that's a McDonald's trick as well, if anyone's
It
curious.
is. But well done fries at In-N-Out. You won't be sorry if you've never tried.
100%. Best thing on
So
their
let's
menu.
talk. So let's talk some AI. So I saw another article this week about failure rates. So I've seen there's a study that Boston Consulting Group did I want to say it was last November. There was one that Accenture did in February. And then there's an MIT study that came out late July that I just saw this past week with high failure rates for initial production deployments for AI projects. What do you make of that?
The recent study has gotten a lot of press. I think they said 95% of all projects fail. And to some extent, that doesn't surprise me because I think that the definition of project is still pretty loose. A lot of things are science experiments,
Agreed.
and the the projects that are succeeding don't have a ton of business impact, I think. What's your take?
Well, first, I thought most of the time you see the failure rate at like 50 or 80. The thing that surprised me about that MIT study that it was as high as 95. And if you look at under the covers, their definition of success was maybe a little strict. But clearly we're seeing the same kind of thing that it hasn't been, everybody's wildly successful with it. And I think it's not unlike any other big technology wave that we've seen over the last 30 years. One of the things I know you've heard me say, and I'll say here again, there's no SKU for AI. There's no, I'm going to make it one purchase and it's going to solve all my problems. We saw this, the internet example that I'll give you is, it's not like when you leased your first T1 line or your first ISDN line, you were done, right? First, you gave your employees access to the public internet. Then you probably did like a public facing website. You didn't hop straight to conducting all your business over a web application. And AI is no different. I think there's a way that you can go about identifying projects, identifying that low-hanging fruit, and finding success, but it's not like you just swipe your credit card and you're done.
I agree very strongly with that. And as two old guys, we have seen that transition multiple times. With the internet, with mobile, with cloud, now with AI, and probably a bunch in between that I'm forgetting. But I do think that you always have this wave of vendors that come in with solutions. And I'll put loose air quotes around solutions or around these newer shifts. We see a lot of that with AI. Um, I think that the companies that are being the most successful taking advantage of AI capabilities right now are the ones who are bringing in SaaS solutions or these more off-the-shelf business solutions that solve real business problems And you're not buying AI, you're buying a business solution that happens to be powered by some AI capabilities. And I think that the sophistication of internal developers to be able to identify those business problems, apply the right technology to it, deliver it at scale, like that is what is taking some time, just like any new technology shift. The internet was a great example of that. Um, People knew how to develop for mainframes and internal client server type applications, and it took a while, even if the technology was mature, for companies to be comfortable with it, their developers to be enabled with it. Everybody to know how to do this at scale for every business problem. So right now, I feel like it's playing a little bit of whack-a-mole. And the folks that I see being the most successful are the ones really focusing on business solutions, business problems with the AI capabilities.
Completely agree. And going back to that internet one, because that was the first one that I lived through. First W3C meeting was December of 94. I had my first web application in production January of 96. And it was terrible. It was a terrible application by any stretch of the imagination. It was CGI bin Perl. It had to emit all of its own HTML through printfs because it was putting stuff out through standard out. There was CSS didn't exist yet. I had to do the UI with pre-tags. Tables weren't part of the HTML spec yet. People forget about those early days, and that's what we're seeing. I think the maturity of the tooling isn't there yet, that the people who have built things like agents, like it's hard to build an agent right now. In 3 years, it won't be nearly as difficult to build an agent as it is now. Just like, back then I was using the CGI bin Perl, and now we've got the mean stack. Like it takes a while for the tooling to catch up so that it can go wide with the developer community. But I want to hit on something that you said a minute ago, the science experiments. I think there's two sources of AI projects that kind of leads to almost immediate doom. And one of them is the science experiment, where you've got somebody who's well-intentioned and wants to go try to build something to solve a problem, but hasn't really thought through the business impact of it. We see that a lot. The second one is the opposite of that, which is like the C-suite or the board makes this mandate. We have to have an AI strategy. And for some people, I saw this in my last gig. Like I saw a financial services company that we need an AI strategy. So let's buy an NVIDIA DGX. That'll be our AI strategy. We'll buy it. And it got delivered and it got set up in the data center. And then they were like, oh, now what? What do we do with it now that we have it? So I think it comes from those two core sources. Am I missing one, or have you seen those two as well?
I think there is an in-between. There's a pattern that I see where developers have an application, it's in production maybe, and they want to bring some AI capability to it. So they'll plumb in ChatGPT, or they'll plumb in some kind of LLM capability. And all of a sudden now it's got this extra intelligence. What they miss, though, is a lot of the additional glue that actually makes it work at enterprise grade and quality and scale. They might miss some of the security bits. They might miss connecting it to live, fresh operational data in a way that makes it actually useful, not yesterday or last week's data from a data warehouse.
Sure.
But actual real live operational data. They may miss the things it takes to scale. They may miss the things it takes to have the right context windows and the right memory and all of those things. So I think, yes, you're seeing some of that sort of in between, where people plug it in and they're like, hey, this works great on my laptop. But once we start to roll it out to hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of users or customers, it starts to fall down. It starts to not be what we expected it to be. And I don't know, does that fall into the 5% that feels like it succeeded, back to our survey, or does that fall into the 95% that feels like it failed? I think there is some in between there of how do you define success. But I would caution large organizations to just plumb in your LLM and think you're done. Like there are definitely other pieces around this that make it a balanced breakfast of all the things that you need, and not just the one piece.
Okay, I like that balanced breakfast of AI. That's the antidote to there's no SKU for AI, I think. Well, so I've had the good fortune the last 2 years to talk to probably 200 different customers about AI, and that's having one-on-one conversations through sales staffs or being on stage in front of 1,000 of them at once, or uh, anything in between. It and I think it's not unlike anything else. There's, I think, a formula for it to try to find some success. And what I always tell people is, so start with like, what are like your 10 biggest problems that you've got in your organization? And if you don't know what those 10 problems are, you probably have some consultancy that can help you discover that. And of those 10 problems, like which maybe 3 do you have good data for? Because AI is still a garbage in, garbage out proposition. That's still the phrase that pays. Like if you've got bad data, AI will not miraculously make it better. So maybe you go from 10 to 3. And then of those 3, like which are you currently, do you currently have business metrics? Do you have key performance indicators, KPIs? Because whatever AI you might try to apply to this solution, how are you going to know if it got any better unless you're recording those business metrics? And that's how I think you pick a good AI project. Like, what's the problems that are facing your organization? What's the ones that have data? And then what one are you already measuring metric? Do you have some historical metrics for that you can potentially apply and see how things are getting better? Now, I've got 3 that I think are low hanging fruit there, but before I lay those out, criticisms or comments on that formula.
No, I think you're absolutely right that starting with the business problem in almost every technology conversation ever is the right call. Like starting with the technology and saying, "Hey, I have a hammer. Everything looks like a nail."
Yeah.
When you're coming at it from just the pure technology, how do we apply this technology? I think your framing is absolutely right that you have to flip it around and you have to say, what are my real, tangible, measurable business problems that I have all the ingredients to go solve, including the tech and the people and the desire and the budget and all of that. Great, now let me go do that. So I think I completely agree with your framing there.
So I think there's 3. 2 of them I saw maybe a year and a half ago. And all 3, what they all have in common is the audience is internal employees first and their productivity. It's far less risky. That's a far more forgivable set of users than to go straight to whoever your customers might be. So those first 2 are very similar, and that's putting some kind of RAG-based chatbot in front of an HR ticketing system or in front of an IT ticketing system. Because what both of those have is you already know what the ticket volume is for both of those. So you already have your business metrics. You probably have an internal website that has documentation that no one is reading that you could use to reduce that ticket volume. So you take that content, you put it into a vector database, you create a RAG-based chatbot, maybe you put it in through whatever your core communications mechanism is, whether that's Slack or Teams or whatever it might be. And now people can get their HR and IT ticket, the simple ones, the ones that, are the top 10 tickets that come in. And maybe, again, you've got data that they can self-solve on 3 of those. So IT and HR ticketing systems are the first 2. The one that I've seen the last 6 months has been sales qualification. So if you hook up some AI to your Salesforce or to whatever spreadsheets you might be using to track the different stages that your customers might be in, if you typically have historical data there of what was it about those customers that helped them transition to being interested to actually making a purchase and whatever stages you're using to track them in between. You can typically use some AI to help identify some early signs in new customers and shrink your sales cycle. And that tends to have, so you can measure how long it takes you to get through that sales cycle. And that tends to have a better bottom line on your revenue than those first two examples.
But still very much in that vein of employee assistance.
Yes.
Right? Like, is that fundamentally that different than answering a ticket for an employee? Like,
It's similar.
yes and no, right? Like the tech stack is very similar, in that you're going to learn from the historicals, you're going to apply that in near real time. And so I like your progression there of like, hey, if you start with these things that are sort of well understood problems in your organization, HR, IT, etc., your teams, your IT teams, your employees can start to learn from it. You can start to get comfortable with how you apply those technologies, and then you can move on to things that aren't just impacting the bottom line potentially or employee satisfaction and engagement, but also then helping you grow the top line as well through tackling things like your sales process efficiency and qualification and other things, and continue to grow from there. But again, it's all anchored back in like, there is a real business challenge here that we can put our finger on and we can measure and we can see that it's going in the right direction.
And it gives you a safe place to learn. That first web application I deployed was used to submit documents into a repository for enterprise support people to answer customer questions. And we measured its success based on the volume of content that people were able to submit. It was easier to submit through a GUI web interface than it was with the old batch. There was a batch email interface that it replaced. It gives you a safe place to try.
Yep, absolutely.
Let's pivot to another topic. So you sent me 2 links yesterday, involving the same famous person, on 2 slightly different topics. Explain what Macrohard is.
So our good friend Elon, tongue in cheek, our good friend Elon came up with a brilliant idea, which I can't say he's the first to do, but seems to be the first to act on it in a significant way, which is, hey, we've got all these, I'll say, legacy application platforms and technology platforms that tons of companies rely on. Can we use AI to sort of regenerate and simulate the outcomes that these software packages deliver, and essentially create a new company to make those capabilities available? And it could be back office stuff, it could be employee productivity things, it could be customer facing applications. But his premise, from what I can gather, is I'm going to use AI to recreate the software stack that the world relies on and go out and create a business around that. And a little play on words, he's calling it Macrohard instead of Microsoft, sort of poking at the bear, so to speak. And this is not a new topic or concept. I've heard the folks on the All In Pod a year ago talking about how a lot of these sort of entrenched enterprise software providers and SaaS providers are really going to be challenged once the AI's ability to generate and operate some of these applications hits a certain level of sophistication. And so I think we are either at or approaching that pivot in the market. And Elon is one of the first at scale, I think, to want to try and take advantage of it.
It's an interesting idea, certainly. And I've seen even those apply that to, if AI is going to get good enough, do you even need any software vendor? Because you could generate your own, CRM or whatever it is. I mean, we've seen things like this before, right? Like if you think about, like, from PeopleSoft to Workday to whatever this is going to gonna turn into. But the other way that we've seen this before, do you remember when, and this, I'm so old, JavaScript was going to be the Microsoft desktop application killer. This was like 98, 99. And how long did it take us to get Workspace from Google? It took a long time. So, like, I think this is a really good idea. I think he might be underestimating how long it will take to get there.
I think that the challenge with something like Google Workspace, G Suite, the 10 names that it's had over the years, it was the switching cost
Sure.
for large enterprise, right? And honestly, I think Teams and the Microsoft suite has really improved over the last few years compared to where it was. I think about like Google G Suite back then compared to like the Outlook experience 5 or 10 years ago. It was painfully different. These days, it often can feel very similar, but the switching cost is very, very high for an enterprise to make that pivot. I think what we will see, and you called it out with, hey, if I can just use AI to replace this piece of business software that I've been buying off the shelf or I've been using as a SaaS solution, if in a week or a month I can have my own developers or a vendor recreate the core elements of that functionality for me using AI and actually put it into production, why am I going to keep paying that vendor hundreds of thousands or tens of millions of dollars a year? And I do think that can and will happen faster as these renewals start to come up and people are like, hey, I'm going to write you a $5 million check this year for this business SaaS application that you provide my company. I can go to Macrohard and get a knockoff version of this, which they will sell me for $250,000, or I can hire a couple of smart developers who can use the tooling or Claude Code or whatever it is, or Grok, and build this for me in a few weeks. And it's not going to be as beautiful or polished or integrated, perhaps, as what I'm paying you $5 million for, but I'll take the other $4.75 million and reinvest that in my business in a way that's more meaningful. And so I do think that there is something to this, and I think it will go beyond just cloning some of these applications. I would expect to see something like what Elon is trying to do or others are trying to do, creating the frameworks that make it easy for companies to rip out the historical and put in some DIY or put in some of the core building blocks of functionality that are AI built, AI run, AI improved. Like I think over the next 24 to 36 months, that's going to be a major, major trend that will benefit the IT infrastructure and cloud provider side of things, the people that are providing all the plumbing and the infrastructure that makes it all work. And I might be biased, but especially the folks that play in the data space. And I think it will hurt the people that are right now at the top of the stack of these sort of fully baked off-the-shelf enterprise solutions.
Well, let me give you two equal and opposite switching cost examples. I think the one that most people are familiar with over the last year and a half, what Broadcom's been doing with VMware, right? Like the switching cost there has been significant. And I've been in a lot of those meetings where people just like don't know what to do because their bill's about to go up 3x. And they didn't extend their licensing agreement prior to the Broadcom acquisition going live, and now they're stuck with a big bill for a while. That's an example of a switching cost that was very expensive. but I had to look this up. I had to pull this out of my back pocket. So I started my first day at HP out of college was in June of 94. And that was about the time. And at the time, like not even everybody had a standard email address. I was on the Exchange beta later in the 90s. I was HP's representative on the Microsoft Exchange beta in the late 90s. And so at that time in 94, the desktop suite of record at HP was Corel and WordPerfect and all that stuff. And they got bought by IBM. And HP was not at the time in the business of lining the pockets with IBM, lining IBM's pockets with money. And we switched to Microsoft in 6 months because it was the fiduciary responsibility there was significant. So, and at one end, you've got what's been going on with Broadcom and VMware, but like if you really need to switch, if you really wanted to hustle, you could. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of offerings this Macrohard thing comes up with, and if they can make the switching cost approachable, then it potentially has legs.
On the topic of our good friend Elon, who's welcome to come on the pod. Elon,
Anytime.
you have a standing invitation. Just hit me up on X, and we'll make it happen. There was some other Elon news this week. Not the 2 Starship Scrub launches that have happened that I've been excited to watch their 10th flight, but weather has gotten in the way. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. But he also announced that he is suing Apple and OpenAI over anti-competitive practices, as he calls them, that they're making it very difficult. And he's sort of been beating the drum on this for a while, but he took it to the courts this week, that unless you are OpenAI, your chances of having the #1 slot in the App Store for an AI application is essentially zero, is what he's alluding. And I don't know. I'm excited to see the data on this as they go through discovery and as they go through the lawsuit to see if there is anything to it. Certainly, there have been some historical cases of Apple favoring certain products or certain partners in the App Store, or putting songs on your iPod that you didn't ask for because of different relationships to go way back. But I do think that it is certainly plausible that because of the deep relationship that Apple and OpenAI formed around ChatGPT, that there could be something there. It could also just be that they have 700 million active users, and that's a lot of users, right? I don't know. What's your take there? Where do you think this is going to go? What do you think Elon is actually trying to accomplish?
Well, I think any chance he gets, he'll sue Sam Altman. Like I think he's been continually suing Sam Altman for what, 5-10 years, whatever it is, in one form or another. The Apple part of this is, to me, the more interesting part than the OpenAI-ish part. OpenAI is almost just like an example here. Has Apple been putting their thumb on the scale in the App Store or in similar routes to market for getting access to the devices? I mean, I still have that U2 album on my iPhone, like 5 phones later or whatever it is. I mean, they probably are. There's an interesting precedent here, not exactly with the App Store, but there's an interesting precedent here, and that's with Epic Games. Right. So I started playing Fortnite 2.5 years ago to have an online place to hang out with nephews who aged out of it. And I just kind of got addicted and still play every day. And Fortnite just got back into the App Store in April after a long series of lawsuits, not over App Store rankings, but over whether or not Apple could charge you fees for having your own way of making purchases in app. They wanted a cut of that, and Epic said no, and they went to court. Epic won a judgment in 2021. Apple dragged their feet on it for 5 forevers, and then finally the judge made them make the changes they needed to in April, and like within a week, Fortnite was back on the App Store. So I think in a weird way, Musk has precedent here to sort of follow this playbook that the Fortnite guys used to sort of fight this battle. And it's always with any of these things, the details is always in the discovery and what Apple does and does not want to be public through the discovery process. So, if you're super cynical, did Musk do this because he wants to dig up more dirt on OpenAI and what he might be able to get through the discovery process? Or does he have a legitimate point that Apple might be putting their thumb on the scale, and in order for Grok or any other application like it to get higher up in the rankings, that, you need a fairer system? I mean, the truth is somewhere in between, but I think those are kind of his two motivations here.
Yeah, I think also he's just still bitter that a good chunk of the funding for OpenAI came out of his pocket, and things went a different direction, right? So I think there is still a little bit of animosity, perhaps, towards how that all went down.
Well, and
anything else you want to cover?
Well, just the last thing is, this is also something we've seen before with Netscape and Microsoft. And strictly speaking, Netscape won that lawsuit, but didn't help, right? I mean, Microsoft is still around and Netscape isn't. So the legal proceedings don't always help, but can potentially change the landscape based on how the legal community rules on different things. So it's something everybody should watch, certainly, if for no other reason that, there might be some legal things come down or some things in discovery that end up tipping the scale as this market matures.
I think it is hard to top that. I think we need to leave it there for this week.
We do. Well, thanks for the time, and thanks everybody for listening.
This has been the Old Guy AI podcast. Views expressed here do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the sponsors or the employers of any hosts or guests.